For years, we've been told the same simple message: eat more fish, and your heart and brain will thank you. But if you've ever stood in front of the seafood counter feeling unsure, wondering which fish is actually a smart choice and which one might not be, you're not alone. Health advice around fish has changed quietly over time, not because fish suddenly became bad, but because we've learned that the type of fish, where it comes from, and how often we eat it can make a real difference, especially as we get older. And most people were never given that full picture. Maybe you've noticed that some meals leave you feeling energized, while others seem to sit heavy, foggy, or uncomfortable afterward. And you can't quite explain why. That confusion is exactly what we're going to clear up today. Calmly, simply, and without scare tactics. Before we go on, have you ever felt uncertain about which fish to choose at the store or restaurant? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might help someone else watching. And stay with me, because the next part explains something most people never realize about fish, and it changes how you look at seafood completely. For a long time, fish has carried a kind of health halo. You hear it at the doctor's office, from family members, in articles shared online. Eat fish, it's good for your heart, your brain, your joints. And for many people, that advice has felt reassuring. But if you've ever paused at the seafood counter, staring at labels, and wondering which fish actually makes sense for you, that hesitation is more common than you might think. What's changed over the years isn't that fish suddenly became good or bad. What's changed is our understanding. Health guidance has slowly moved away from one-size-fits-all messages and toward more nuanced conversations about quality, source, balance, and context. Especially as we age, those details start to matter more. Not in a dramatic or alarming way, but in a practical, everyday sense that affects how we feel over time. Many people don't realize that when older advice said, eat more fish, it was often based on population-level observations, not the wide variety of seafood options we see today. Back then, there were fewer farming methods, fewer global supply chains, and far less processing. Today's seafood landscape is more complex, and that complexity can feel overwhelming. But understanding it doesn't require becoming an expert, just learning a few key ideas that help you make sense of what's on your plate. One of those ideas has to do with size and lifespan. In nature, fish don't all live the same way. Some grow quickly and live short lives, while others take years to reach full size. Over time, researchers began noticing a pattern. Larger, longer-living fish tend to accumulate more substances from their environment. This isn't because they're harmful by nature. It's simply biology. The longer an organism lives and the higher it sits in the food chain, the more exposure it has over time. That's why public health conversations often speak more cautiously about certain large species, especially for people who eat fish frequently or are later in life. This isn't about fear or avoidance. It's about understanding patterns and making informed choices. Smaller fish, which live shorter lives and feed lower on the food chain, generally have less time to accumulate what's around them. That simple concept explains a lot of the guidance you may hear without needing to memorize lists or rules. Another source of confusion for many people is the difference between wild and farmed fish. At first glance, they look similar. They're labeled the same species, they're prepared the same way, and they're often displayed side by side. But how a fish is raised can influence its nutritional profile. Wild fish live in natural environments and eat a varied diet, while farmed fish are raised in controlled settings with specific feed. Neither approach is automatically good or bad, but they're not identical. Modern fish farming has helped make seafood more accessible and affordable, which matters for global nutrition. At the same time, Researchers continue to study how feed composition and living conditions influence fat content and nutrient balance. That's why you'll sometimes hear health discussions focus on reading labels or understanding sourcing, not to create anxiety, but to bring transparency to choices that were once invisible to consumers. This growing awareness has also led to renewed interest in small fish, especially in conversations about healthy aging. Small fish have long been part of traditional diets around the world, often eaten whole or lightly preserved. They tend to be nutrient-dense and accessible, and because of their size and life cycle, they fit well into modern discussions about balance and sustainability. For many people, rediscovering these options feels less like a restriction and more like expanding the menu. At the same time, there's been a lot of conversation about fats, especially omega-3s and omega-6. These terms get thrown around online, sometimes in confusing or extreme ways. In reality, both are part of normal diets, and the conversation is less about eliminating one and more about balance. Omega-3 fats are often highlighted in fish discussions because they've been studied in relation to heart and brain function, while omega-6 fats are common in many processed foods. What matters most is the overall pattern. When people hear inflammation, it can sound scary, but in everyday terms, it's about how the body responds to stress and wear over time. Diet is just one piece of that picture. Understanding fat balance isn't about counting grams or following strict rules. It's about being aware that different foods contribute differently, and variety helps smooth out those effects. Brain health is another area where fish often enters the conversation. You'll see headlines suggesting strong connections, and then others urging caution. The truth sits somewhere in between. Researchers are actively exploring how nutrients found in fish relate to cognitive aging, memory, and long-term brain function. What's important is how these findings are communicated. Responsible discussions focus on associations and trends, not guarantees. For viewers, that distinction matters. It's reassuring to know that scientists are studying these questions carefully, but it's equally important to avoid turning food into a promise or a prescription. Brain health is influenced by many factors: sleep, activity, social connection, learning, and overall nutrition patterns. Fish can be part of that broader picture without being positioned as a single solution. As people move into their 50s, 60s, and beyond, many start thinking differently about routines. Meals that once felt automatic become more intentional. Energy levels, digestion, and comfort after eating become signals worth noticing. Building a smarter fish routine at this stage isn't about cutting things out abruptly. It's about variety, moderation, and paying attention to how different choices fit into your life. That might mean rotating different types of seafood instead of relying on just one. It might mean checking labels more often or choosing preparation methods that feel lighter and easier to digest. For some, it's simply about slowing down and reconnecting with food as part of daily well-being rather than a checklist of nutrients. What's encouraging is that none of this requires perfection. Public health conversations increasingly emphasize patterns over time, not single meals or rigid rules. Awareness grows gradually. Confidence builds through understanding, not pressure. And food becomes less about fear and more about support. If you've ever felt confused by changing nutrition advice, you're not behind. You're paying attention. These conversations evolve because research evolves and because people ask better questions. The goal isn't to chase every new headline, but to understand the bigger picture well enough to make choices that feel reasonable and sustainable for you. Before we wrap up, take a moment to reflect on your own habits. Have you noticed that certain fish meals feel lighter or more satisfying than others? Have labels ever left you unsure? If so, you're not alone. Feel free to share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. These conversations help everyone learn together. If you found this discussion helpful, consider giving the video a like so it reaches others who may be wondering the same things. And stay with us, because coming up next, we'll continue exploring everyday health topics that quietly shape how we feel, often in ways we don't notice until we slow down and look a little closer.